Hi everybody, and welcome to another installment, our fourth show of this limited series, Max's Memories, which is being shown on Mondays. Judging from the cards and letters that I've gotten, you not only have great questions, but you've been enjoying this time that we get to spend together during these very, very stressful times in our country and in the world. So I'm glad to be with you. I have more questions, new questions, and I'm going to give them to you right now. We're going to get right to it. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to toss them in the drum, which, as some of you who have tuned in lately know, this is the floor tom-tom, the 12 by 15 inch floor tom-tom that I used on the River album and the Born in the USA album. It was actually a rack tom. And back in the 60s, 1968, I bought a drum set. I traded in another drum set I had for what they call the Ludwig Carmine Apiece. Big drum set, 2 bass drums. This was the small tom by the bass drum. And I used it for a long time. I used the drum set on all the recordings with Bruce, but I decided that this drum sounded so good I would put it on the floor. So that's what you got here, and I'm using it kind of as my receptacle, tumbling dice sort of receptacle for all the questions. And as promised, I have 2 bits of memorabilia from my extensive collection, and I wanted to show them to you here. This is an interesting one. As you can see, this is a bottle of Guinness. This is a real big bottle of Guinness. And we were gifted these big bottles of Guinness, where else? In Dublin, Ireland, when we played there on the River Tour. And it says, Guinness, the Boss Brew, Max Weinberg, the E Street, the River Tour, Dublin, which would be May 27th, 2016, and the 29th. And this is from the Open Gate Brewery. And if you can see, it's even got the river blue on it. We put away quite a few of these that night after that concert. I must say it was a lot of fun. We loved playing in Dublin. We love playing anywhere we play, but you go back to the hotel and open a couple of these babies, and that's the capper to a great night. The other thing I wanted to show you is right over here. This is an action figure of my son, Jay, playing with Slipknot. A little action figure. I don't have an action figure. My son Jay, he's got an action figure. He deserves an action figure, because when you see him drum, it's incredible. But this is just a wonderful little memento. So we're going to get right to the questions. Here we go. All right. This is from Kelly Jones from Atlanta, Georgia. Please think about the first time you heard yourself with Bruce and the E Street Band on the radio. Can you please tell me where you were, what you felt, and who first told you about it? Kelly, that's a great question. And there is an exact moment, the first time I heard me playing with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band on the radio. And it was in California, and I've told this story before. I think I told this story on the short-lived Dennis Miller show back in, I guess it was 89 or 90, 91. I actually was with Bruce. We were driving a rental station wagon in California. And I think we were on the Born to Run tour. And we were driving along. It was late at night. We were going to go to a diner or something up in Northern California. And we turned on the radio, and listening to the radio, Jungleland came on the radio. It was an unbelievable moment. We pulled over to the side of the road and sat there in the darkness listening to Jungleland. Now, I don't know if he had heard it before. I hadn't heard it on the radio, and it was an incredible moment. I've never forgotten this. Doing that, I can see us sitting in the car. He was driving, I was sitting in the passenger side. And we pulled off into this sort of sandy dune area and listened. It was pretty amazing. You never forget your first time that you hear yourself on the radio. Okay. Question from Ludwig Ward, who's 16 years old, from Stockholm, Sweden. Well, I hope you're doing good these days, Ludwig. Your question is, what were your thoughts on the breakup that happened back in the 80s? My dad was going to all of your concerts in Europe back then, and he was frightened. He didn't think there would be any more E Street shows. What were your thoughts? Did you think you would ever tour again together? Well, it was a moment of growing up, ladies and gentlemen, when we all got a phone call from Bruce in September of 1989. And the fact that we didn't play together we did the recording sessions in 95, but we actually didn't tour together for 11 years. It was never articulated that we were breaking up, just, we were sort of like birds, chicks, being tossed out of the nest to fly on our own. And it was the worst of times and the best of times. In the worst of times, it was very disorienting, obviously, but on an artistic level, I could certainly understand it. Bruce wanted to stretch. On a personal and professional level, it was like the bottom dropped out. So it was, as I say, the best and the worst of times, because it made me, at the age of 38, I'm 69 now, so 31 years ago, it made me fly on my own. And I didn't get altitude right away. It took a few years. It took 4 years to really find myself as a drummer, find myself coming back to drumming. So it was, in retrospect, a natural progression. And the interesting thing is we stayed friendly. Bruce made a huge effort during the period where we weren't playing together to stay in touch with everybody. I used to go out every few weeks to LA. I stayed at his house, and he was very concerned that everybody got their footing. And it took a while. It was something that really you had to get used to. 15 years of nonstop activity, and then it sort of just stopped. It was after the Amnesty International tour, which was a great experience, which we did in 1988. And we got that phone call, and I would say it changed my life. It changed my family's life. It was disorienting. And the story of it is long and involved of how I made my way back. I won't go into that, but it worked out. And we came back better and stronger in 1999 than we had before that. And we were, all glad to see Steve Van Zandt come back into the band. Oh, Mike Talermo from Vancouver, Canada asks, as two of the finer actors from the E Street Band, that's very kind of you, have you and Little Steven ever thought about teaming up for a crime drama series or other TV streaming projects? And then he says, Netflix, we're looking at you. Well, I would say Steve is certainly the actor. I did a lot of sketch comedy on TV. I've recently had the pleasure of guesting on the TV show Blue Bloods, where I played interestingly, a Queens, New York mob real estate guy, a real estate developer named Marya. And that was a lot of fun. I did 2 episodes of that. I did 3 episodes, or maybe 4 episodes of Hawaii Five-0 from Hawaii. That was nice. I love both of those shows, and I was delighted that they asked me to join them. Steve is a real actor, though. If you've seen Lillehammer, you know what I'm talking about. And of course, his work with The Sopranos. And, I enjoy these little guest shots that I've done, but I wouldn't plan on making a living at it. There's plenty of really good actors out there who are way ahead of me in line. But I try to learn my lines. As Spencer Tracy said, don't bump into the furniture. So the thought of us teaming up, I guess we'll save that for our videos and for playing live on stage with the E Street Band. This is from Patrick Curry from Ashley, Pennsylvania. I believe Bruce established in his memoir that you were in the studio the night of the 1977 New York City blackout. You remember what song you were working on when that happened? Did you hang around or immediately hightail it back to New Jersey? 1977 was an unbelievable blackout in Manhattan. And we were recording. I don't remember the song, but we were in the middle of a take, actually recording. The lights went out, the tape machine went, it just stopped. And we thought at first it was just the electricity in the record plant. But no, we walked outside, actually en masse, all of us walked outside, and everywhere you turned, the lights were out. The record plant used to be in an office building at 44th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues. I'm sorry, 8th and 9th Avenues. So we walked towards Times Square. It's actually still there, the building's there. It's now the Club Birdland Jazz Club. But we walked toward Times Square and it was completely dark, except for the people, of course, millions and millions of people. In New York City, and the whole city was dark. And it lasted, I think we went home. I don't think we resumed recording. I think it lasted for quite a long time. But it was shocking. Whatever song we were working on, we didn't get a take. We had to, come back and pick it up, I'm sure. But that was certainly memorable. We also, in 1977, all of us went down to see the debut of Star Wars. We did it as a band. We used to do that quite a bit. I remember seeing I think it was Jaws 2, and Billy Van Zandt, Steve Van Zandt's brother, was in Jaws 2, and we all went to the movie theater. We were on the road someplace, I think in the Midwest. All went there, and I remember we sat in the first row. We got there late, so we're like, looking up at the screen, and we saw Billy come on the screen on a raft. This is from Stu Kohn of Newport, Pennsylvania. Most people don't know about your connection with Jim Weatherby and NASA back in the shuttle days. How did that start out and play out? Well, I've been a fan of the space program since I was a little kid. You couldn't grow up in the late 50s and 60s without really being completely immersed in that, even if you didn't like science or weren't good at it, which I wasn't. But it was so fresh, it was so new. So I've always appreciated both the space program and aviation in general. Astronauts, really, they're incredible heroes. And if you go back to the original era of John Glenn and Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom and the guys in the Mercury program and then the Apollo program, it was something that you grew up with, from the first 1957 when they launched Sputnik. And you could actually look up in the sky and see Sputnik streaming across the night sky. So Danny Federici and I were big fans of this. Danny was incredibly adept at science and computers, cameras. He was a real tech head, and he understood all of that stuff. So we were playing Houston, and we had a day or two off before the show. And just on a whim, I called up the Johnson Space Center in Houston and asked if there was a tour we could go on. And at the time, they weren't giving tours. Told them my name. I got a call back. And it was a couple of us. I think maybe three of us went. I know it was me and Danny. I think it was Danny's then wife. And it turns out that my dear friend, now retired Commander Jim Weatherby, who I think on the space shuttle logged more time up there than any other astronaut, I guess he heard that we were coming by, and he's a drummer, and he was a fan of my drumming. So he gave us the tour. This was, I think, on the Tunnel of Love tour, and yeah, it was. And he hadn't flown yet. He was a Top Gun pilot in the Navy. He was a computer specialist. One of the coolest guys I've ever met in my life. He actually came just recently to see me play in Portland and introduced him to the guys in the jukebox that I play with. And they were going crazy with his stories of space travel. So he gave us the tour, and he hadn't flown yet, and we promised to stay in touch, and we did. So he got assigned to be the right seat, which is the captain's seat. You have the commander on the left and you have the captain on his first flight. And he invited me down there to Cape Canaveral on the Kennedy Space Center to witness his first flight. He did, I think, 8 or 9 flights. He retired, and he's still one of my dear friends. He lives out in Oregon, and I have seen the space program up close. I mean, really close. And thanks to Jim and his colleagues, have had great experiences there, and I'm fascinated. And he's fascinated by drums. He plays in a band, and he can play. And he's always asking me about drumming. I've had him sit on my drums in a stadium with the, before a sound check and have the big sound on, and you hear that, and we trade stories about my interest in space travel, his interest in drumming. His band is called Max Q. Max Q, I believe, is the velocity at which you leave Earth's gravity. And, they played all 60s and 70s rock tunes. So we have a deep friendship, and thanks to Commander Jim Weatherby and his wife Robin, I've been able, with my family, we all went to see several space shuttle flights take off, and the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. You're about a mile away from the launch pad with the families. This was in 90 or 91. I do remember the band had disbanded by that point. I met him when the band was together, and then we disgrouped. And we went down there, and when the space shuttle, you're there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they finally start counting down, at 6 seconds, they ignite the engines as you see this big plume of smoke come up. And you're about a mile away across what looks like a pond, a lake, a big pond, an estuary, really. And you see it slowly, you see the flames come out, and you see the shuttle with your bare eye, because you're close, lift off. You don't hear anything. And then suddenly you see the water of the lake ripple, and then the ground starts to shake, and all the birds that are around, they all fly away. And then you hear the sound. And when you watch it on TV, you can't get it. That's why people flock to see space liftoffs. It sounds like a billion firecrackers going off. It was the loudest sound, continuous sound, that I ever heard. It was absolutely thrilling. And Danny and I went down one night to see we were playing in Orlando, and we got invited to a nighttime launch. It wasn't Jim Weatherby's flight, and I love talking about this stuff. And we waited, but the flight got scrubbed because of weather. So, Danny and I went down there, and, we bought all the souvenirs, the NASA jacket, hats. Danny was very proud of that. All right, ladies and gentlemen. This is from Rick Woods of Colchester, Vermont. I know exactly where that is. I've been up there. I'm assuming you overlapped for a bit with Suki Lahav back in 74 and 75. What was it like working with her? And what was it like having a woman in the band at that time? Well, Rick, Suki Lahav is a historical figure in the annals of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. She was the wife of our recording engineer, Louis Lahav, who was also our road manager. He drove the van. He was the recording engineer on the first 2 albums, and then I believe he engineered Thunder Road. And then they both moved back to Israel. They were citizens, and they were born in Israel. And they had a small child, and they moved back, so they left the fold. Having Suki in the band was fantastic. She sang background vocals, and the intro to Jungleland, when I hear that, that's Suki. That's her melody. And she is a delightful person. She was delightful to have in the band, and very unassuming. Both Louis and Suki were incredibly intellectual and reading poetry, and the fact that we had a common religion created a closeness right away in many ways. And I can remember both of them driving down the New Jersey Turnpike and looking right past Newark Airport going south and seeing all the big oil refineries. And they thought it was beautiful. To them, it showed progress. And I think to most people who live in New Jersey and drive between New Jersey and Philadelphia, that may be not the feeling they get. But it was wonderful. And Suki only played with us, I believe, that first tour that I did in '74, and then perhaps a couple of months into '75. And then they went back to Israel. This is from Sabrina Biondi from Milan, Italy. Milan, Italy, where we love to play. San Siro Stadium, I believe they're renovating that, or they're going to be building a new stadium. It's like what they did with Giants Stadium. And now they have a new Giants Stadium in New Jersey. They're upgrading San Siro. San Siro is one of the most exciting places we ever played. But that's not the point of this question. She asks, in Godspell, which I played in, is Godspell the only musical you have played the drums in on or off Broadway? And which musical theater soundtracks do you think have the most interesting parts for the rhythm section? Well, Sabrina, my mother was a Broadway musical fanatic. And practically every weekend, I can't say every weekend, but nearly every Saturday, she took myself and my two older sisters to a matinee. And in the 50s and 60s, I saw everything. I saw My Fair Lady. I saw The King and I, the revival. I saw Bye Bye Birdie with Dick Van Dyke and Cheetah Rivera. And I appreciated those Broadway shows so much because the spectacle, and you had 60 musicians playing in a pit band. The sound was incredible. I have a long history with Broadway, both as a theater goer and playing in the show Godspell. I was playing in Godspell, which was very successful in the early 70s in New York, right up until the time I joined the E Street Band. In fact, a very good friend of mine in the show in Godspell, who became a very, very well-known actor. This was back in '74. I said, I met this guy from New Jersey. He's a fantastic rock singer, songwriter, great band. I'm going to leave the show and join his band. And I was making a lot of money in the Broadway show for then. And took a big pay cut to join the E Street Band. And he said, Max, I don't know, you're making a big mistake. This is Broadway. This show is hugely popular. It could run for 5, 8, 10 years. I mean, look at Chorus Line. I said, yeah, but this guy's really special. I could feel it musically. Who knew what would happen? But I felt the night that I played with Bruce and the guys, who was Clarence, Danny, and Gary, that I had just been plopped into something really different. And I really wanted that gig, and I got the gig. And this friend of mine went on to great success in movies and TV. And I've occasionally seen him since then, and we've laughed about that. But I was playing in Godspell, and at the same time, the same composer for Godspell wrote a show that they hadn't even they cast one guy. It was called The Magic Show, and it was built around a magician named Doug Henning. And I auditioned for it. And I completely blew the audition. I mean, they wouldn't even consider me. It was very challenging rhythms, a lot of multi-time signatures, and I really couldn't do it. I mean, I was basically a rock drummer, which is what Godspell was. This was something else. Actually, Paul Schaefer, who was for 31 years, I think, David Letterman's sidekick and musical director, marvelous musician, incredible band leader. He was in Godspell with me. We both, he was from Canada. He came down from Canada to do the American version of Godspell. It was a Canadian show. And he auditioned for the Magic Show and he got it. But he left the Magic Show to then go play piano for the first season of Saturday Night Live. And so it's everybody's sort of connected. Okay, I'm not quite sure how to respond to this, but I'll give it a shot. This is from Kaylee Kendall, UK. What, if any, role does spirituality play in your drumming? I would also just love for you to acknowledge my existence and transmit some of your mightiness to me through the screen so I can live the rest of my life in peaceful drummer bliss and also kick ass. Well, Kaylee, this is for you. I consider myself a spiritual person, and I really basically, generally in life, I believe that I and my family, my wife Becky, my daughter Allie, my son Jay, live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As a drummer, I feel that my best role is to be a helping drummer. Always be aware of what the other people are doing and give them little, what we call pickups, 1, 2, bop, 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 so they know where the beat is. That's the drummer's first job. And it is a spiritual approach in that when you're doing that, you can't be thinking of anything else. It's the most Zen-like, if I can use that word, that I get. All these sort of mantras, let's say, that you hear about attaining that high level, you have to do that. You stay in the flow by concentration, but being very relaxed. And you also have to recognize, and I do, that this is the highest level of what I do. And when I reach that with Bruce and the E Street Band, that is, for me, a state of bliss. That's not to say it's relaxed all the time, because you're watching for cues, it's going by really fast. I have a friend who used to play pro baseball, and he told me, he was a great batter, and he told me, well, sometimes the ball looks like the period at the end of a sentence, and sometimes it looks like a basketball. Time slows down, and you can be relaxed and take your time. It's very similar to that with drumming. Sometimes it's just almost effortless. You wonder where the time went. Other times you have to fight for every beat, but you have to remain relaxed, you have to remain focused, and I think that comes from not only your technique and your chops, but it comes from your heart. I hope that addressed your question, Kelly. And here's a shout out to you. Keep kicking ass on those drums. Okay, well, I answered that. I threw it back. Maybe that one came in twice. Okay, this is from Josep Marya from Catalonia, Spain. Hola, Josep. Some years ago, you said that the E Street Band did try playing Electric Nebraska. Can you share your memories of that, what it sounded like, and do you think that someday it will see the light of day in a box set? Well, Joseph, thank you for that question. We actually more than tried. We played it. It was great. It was fantastic. In fact, for 2 weeks or so before we actually went into the studio to record that, we rehearsed the songs at Roy Bitten's house in his living room. He had this beautiful house with this big, high kind of cathedral ceiling. It sounded incredible in there. I have cassette tapes of those rehearsals, and we did all the Nebraska material, and we nailed it. I mean, it was a great rock album. And when Bruce listened to it, he loved it, but it wasn't what he wanted to say at that moment. He had fallen in love with the acoustic Nebraska that he made in his bedroom, basically, on a little 4-track recorder, and he carried that cassette around. This is a true story. It's in his book. Everybody knows the story, I think, if you're a Bruce Springsteen fan. He carried the cassette around in his jean pocket the whole summer. I heard it a lot of times. And, it was basically the demos that we learned the songs from. And then we went in there and we did some killer versions of all that material. I mean, through the years, we've never played Nebraska, I think, from beginning to end, but we've played all those songs. But it wasn't the statement he wanted to make. It wasn't the sound he wanted to make. Born in USA was really huge and big and loud. And Nebraska was softer. And it was very directly addressing what was going on politically, socially, culturally, economically, for sure, in the United States at the time. And the story of that I'll leave to others, but I was very proud of playing on the electric version, and I love playing, sitting there and just watching Bruce play them acoustically, because you hear the words. All right. This is from Sherry Acevedo. What is the strangest gig you've ever played? Well, I've played some strange gigs. I'll tell you about a strange gig I played when I was, I think, 15. I was big for my age, and my father, who supported me completely in my drumming and would drive me to my gigs, of course, and we'd take turns driving families. You know, I didn't have a driver's license, but I did have fake ID that allowed you to get an ABC card, which meant that if you were 16 years old, you could play in places where they served liquor. And I was big for my age, and I always played with older people. So this band I was playing with, I was 15, they were probably close to 25. They were sort of a doo-wop group that picked up instruments. And, you know, I played shows, and I could do that kind of stuff. They got booked into a place called the Torch Lounge, which was in North Arlington, New Jersey, which if you're ever in Newark and you drive down by the river in a van and you keep going north, you're driving along the Passaic River, and on the other side of that is North Arlington. And this club, it was called the Torch Lounge, they advertised go-go girls, which were very popular, you know, the dancers in the cage. In the 60s, all the clubs had them. And the cages, you see it on old TV shows like Hullabaloo and Shindig. The band would play and the girls would dance. And, you know, usually in very skimpy outfits. I was 15 years old. And this one club this was actually the first story I ever told Bruce, but this one club had this special attraction who was a go-go girl. Her name, forgive me for being politically incorrect, but it's the story of one of the strangest gigs I've ever had. Her name was Fatty Patty. They billed her as 300 pounds of go-go. And she was a great dancer. And she was really big and very, very sweet, a really nice woman. And when she danced on stage, she completely blocked me out. And I remember telling Bruce this story. Yeah, I used to do this gig where I would back up this woman named Patty, and they billed her as Fatty Patty, and she was literally a big attraction, and people would come from far and near to go see her dance. And this was in 1966. That was a strange gig. One of the other strange gigs I can tell you about is we were playing at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, and I don't even know if it's still there anymore. I'm not quite sure it is. But we did a sound check, and Clarence went to a local bistro, and he met two of the dancers there, and he invited them to the show, and they came to the show. They more than came to the show. During 10th Avenue Freeze-Out, Clarence invited them on stage to do their thing, and their thing was disrobing. And there may be video on a camera somewhere or pictures, but he didn't tell anybody he was doing this. And only Clarence could get away with it and do it, but he brought up, you know, two dancers who then started to strip, you know, and it shocked everybody. It shocked Bruce most of all. And, you know, they were politely kind of danced off the stage by him. And that was a strange gig because suddenly, you know how I never take my eyes off of Bruce. Suddenly, it was a distraction on the stage. So those were two of my strangest jobs that I ever played. All right, we got time for a few more today. This is from Frank van Dorestein from Amsterdam. I just played in Amsterdam. I hope you were there, Frank, at the Paradise. That was great. I've noticed that you sing along with Bruce a lot during live shows. Did you ever consider asking Bruce to be an official backing vocal member of the E Street Band? Well, Frank, my singing career with Bruce Springsteen E Street Band was short-lived. I'll tell you why. In the ad that I answered in 1974, where Bruce and the band were looking for a new drummer, it said drummer, no Junior Ginger Bakers, piano player, Jerry Lee Lewis to classical, and then it said all must sing. So, I'm not going to say I don't sing, and so I gave it a shot. I played the drums, I got in the band, and for the first two rehearsals, I gamely tried to sing. I mean, I did sing. not very well, apparently, because during my third rehearsal, Bruce came up to me and goes, Max, you can just drum. And that was the end of my professional singing career with the E Street Band. And I've been singing along with the rest of you ever since. And I'm not sure why I do that. I don't think I may be emitting some sounds, but you know, I guess it's just a habit. Although someone did, I believe it was in Kansas City, on the last tour we did, they held up a sign and said, "Let Max sing." So I sang, and Steve Van Zandt suggested singing the Shirelle song that the Beatles covered, "Boys." Ringo sang it. So Bruce comes up on my drum stand. He's holding the mic for me as I'm singing it, and I have no idea what I sounded like. I tried to sound like Ringo, who's a really good singer, but I'm game. If you ever saw me on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, you know that when I'm asked to do something, whatever it is, I will do it to the best of my ability. Let's see. Fran Oney. This is a simple question. Were you born at Beth Israel Hospital in Newark? Fran was. Yes, I was born on Friday, April 13th, late at night. I could say it was a dark and stormy night, but I have no recollection of that. At Newark's Beth Israel Hospital, which was in the South Ward, they call it. The South Ward was the Weequahic section, near Weequahic Park, right next to the airport. And it was the Jewish section of Newark. If you've seen The Plot Against America, the TV series, or read any of Philip Roth's books, they pretty much all take place in the South Ward. Newark is divided into different, the Central Ward, the East Ward, down Neck is down past Newark Airport, and they call it the Ironbound section. There's a lot of, I have great memories of being down there because, you know, that's where I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey, but everything we did, my family, when I was little, was in Newark. So yeah, I was born at Beth Israel Hospital. The drum fills at the end of Total Eclipse of the Heart is a question coming from Adam Hindle. Well, Adam, he wants to know, what was it like working with Jim Steinman and doing those Meatloaf records? Jim was a genius. I can tell you, all those fills at the end of that for Bonnie Tyler's record, Jim would want me to, he would be in the control room and he'd be going like this. He'd want me to go nuts and he'd want me to start hitting the cymbals and really overplaying, because he thought he described it as it represented this teenage angst. So, you know, when you have a producer and you're the drummer, you do what the producer tells you. And I made a lot of records with Jim Steinman and several of the Meatloaf, Bonnie Tyler. He wrote a couple of songs, I think, for Air Supply. And those were pretty wild sessions. I got to play with Davey Johnson from Elton John's band, Nicky Hopkins, who the legendary English piano player, you know, great musicians. So those were a lot of fun records to make. And they went pretty quickly, considering. This is from Matthias Freiman from Gothenburg, Sweden. What's your memory from the night in Gothenburg back in 1985 when you guys almost demolished the stadium? I was not born yet, but the tale of that epic night still roams the streets of Gothenburg, or they say Gothenburg. Matthias, that's a great question, because people were, this was on the Born USA tour, and you've probably been in the crowd yourself when you can feel, if you're like in an indoor arena, you can feel the place kind of moving. So we're on the stage, and it was a sort of a hyperboidal shaped stadium outside, and it suddenly started to, you could feel the waves, and apparently it cracked the second tier, you know, the sort of the balcony. It was big. There was probably 60 or 70,000 people there, and it was the first time we played Gothenburg. I remember going down there shopping street, and this was in the middle 80s, so I would just, every store, we just bought up everything we could. I got some great shirts there in Gothenburg. Actually, one of those shirts made it onto, I think it was I brought two. Bruce ended up with one, and he wore it on the cover, I think, of Lucky Town or one of his solo records. It's a pink kind of print shirt. I had two of them. I still have one. But always playing there is fantastic. The fans are so fantastic in Gothenburg and Sweden, all over the Scandinavian countries, everywhere we play, really. And I think it's a reflection of what we try to give, an experience you can't get anyplace else. So it's pleasing to hear that people are still talking about that night, and it's kind of taken on an epic proportion in some fashion, because they had to fix the stadium. And we kind of laughed about it. You know, nobody got hurt, but we broke the stadium in Gothenburg, Sweden. Well, here's a wild question from Paul Ariss, A-R-I-S-S, from Liverpool, England. I'm happy to answer a question of anybody's from Liverpool, England, from where the Beatles came. Paul Ariss, during the incredibly long and intense sessions for Born to Run, did you ever think you may have made a mistake joining Bruce? That maybe he was going to demand too much of your life being involved with him and his music? Never in my wildest dreams did I ever thought that I made a mistake. Meeting Bruce and the E Street Band was the culmination of everything I'd worked for as a drummer for the previous 16 years. I met Bruce and the guys when I was 23, and I'd been playing since I was 7 years old or so, and actually playing little gigs. So no, you know, it was the life changer. Everyone should be so lucky. I was ready. I believe it was destiny, because my career path took me to that audition. And so I never looked back, you know. It's funny because at every level, you know, the Born to Run sessions were actually the tracking. We went pretty quickly. That only took about 3 weeks. It was recorded with Roy on piano, Gary on bass, me on drums, and Bruce playing guitar and singing scratch vocals, you know, which were then either fixed or some of it he used that was the original vocal. So it was all overdubs. And the idea was to get very clean tracks, and that didn't take long at all, actually. We rehearsed all that material. I remember John Landau coming down to our rehearsal in Neptune, New Jersey, and we had been working on the song Backstreets. And he came in and he had the idea for me to do that tom-tom thing. Do-do-do-do-boom, bop-boom, ba-ba-ba-ba-boom, bop-boom. And he said, you know, Max, try something like the Running Scared by Roy Orbison, but not that beat, something like that. And we worked on that. He was very, very helpful in streamlining my drumming very quickly into doing the basic tracks. So it wasn't that grueling, and then I was done. I didn't go to the studio until we started, actually, right at the beginning of July of that Born to Run tour, July 20th, I think it was. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we started rehearsing for the tour that opened that night in Providence, Rhode Island. But no, you know, this being with Bruce and the E Street Band through the ups and downs, it's been just a pageant. It's been the greatest professional and in many ways personal experience, other than my family, that I've ever had. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Answered those, and then I'll catch up with you again next week. This is from Carlos Blanco from Miami, Florida. Would you say that during the show there may be a few tiny mistakes, sometimes caused by Bruce's crazy set lists, that maybe only you and Bruce notice and not the audience? Well, we don't call them mistakes. They're sort of beautiful, unplanned moments. And there's significant ones on records, actually, where you might have gone to the wrong verse or chorus, whether it was me or anybody else. Generally, you can't fix the drums, so my mistakes, if you want to call them that, you know, I may have played a fill in the middle of a phrase. That ends up on the record and becomes a personality thing. But sometimes, Bruce, I've become a great lip reader. Bruce has acknowledged that I'm the best lip reader, because he'll turn around and if you're lucky, he'll tell you what song he's changed it to. A lot of times I just have to use my intuition and figure out what song he means by the way he's counting it off. And he has gotten to 1, 2, 3, and I haven't known what song it is. And I'd say 50% of the time when that happens, if I don't know what song it is, I make the right choice based on what I'm sort of subtly getting from him. Very often he'll just turn around and he'll yell out a song, and I've got ear monitors in, I can't really hear him, and Nils will be right next to him. Nils always runs over and asks him what song, because he has to change guitars, and as Nils running back, I'll yell, "Nils!" And he'll stop for a second and tell me what song. Yeah, there have been a couple of times where he said a song, counted off a song, and I went into the wrong song. I remember that happened on Candy's Room once, and a long time ago. It was probably in 76 or 7, but I'm down there going, I'm really concentrated, and I start feeling like hitting my face something, right? And I thought it was like a bug or something, and I keep playing, and then I look down and I see a guitar pick, and Bruce was trying to get me to stop by flinging guitar picks at me, get my attention, because he didn't want to sing that song at that point. So eventually I stopped and we went into some other song. But like I said, it's all part of the show. You make it work. You can't get freaked out. Although in the early days I would, you don't want to make a mistake. And maybe you do get it freaked out by it, but you do your best to recover. And as Bruce has sung many times, someday we'll look back on this and it'll all seem funny. And those little moments do. So here's our last question of this session, our 4th session. I want to thank you all for sending in your cards and your letters, asking these questions. I hope you've enjoyed it. From some of the comments that the kind people of Backstreets have sent along to me, you have enjoyed this. So thank you for tuning in during these certainly crazy times we're experiencing, and we all hope that we come out 100% whole on the other side. So here is from a gentleman named Owen Morgan from Dublin, Ireland. Well, here's to you, Owen. Do you ever sit down and listen to Bruce Springsteen's records? If so, which is your favorite album to listen to? Owen, that's a great question, and I'll tell you why, because I go through phases. If I want to remember what I was sort of feeling like the fall and winter of 74 and 75, I listened to the second album, The Wildly Innocent, and it puts me right back there. Now, I didn't play on that record. It's one of my favorite records because it not only encompasses the music and the songs, it's that time when I joined the band. And then Bruce only had 2 records out, Greetings and The Wildly Innocent. So that was my beginning. It was all new. And if I'm driving around on a summer day and I got the windows open, or I have a convertible I drive sometime, the top down, I put on The River. And I got this cranking sound system. And I play that River album from start to finish, from that first snare shot on, I guess, Ties That Bind. I love that album. I love them all. They all mean something to me, but I would say that for driving around at the Jersey Shore or wherever I am at the moment, and you put on The River and just let it go, that's just transporting you. But to pick out one album, it would be hard, They're all so different. I'm a big fan of the Magic album. I thought that was an incredible album. I loved playing those songs. But I'm personally looking forward to the next album. So with that, I'll bid you all adieu for this session of Max's Monday Memories. You've been watching either on Instagram TV or YouTube. I want to thank you for tuning in. And I will say, I will see you further on up the road.